12 more Russian Shadow Fleet vessels were hit this week alone, and that number carries more weight than it first appears because it's not the headline figure that matters most. The question is what 218 struck ships in 33 days that actually means for Russia's war economy, and whether Ukraine has now permanently rewritten the rules of maritime conflict in the Black Sea. Robert Brovdi, commander of Ukraine's unmanned systems forces, confirmed on August 8th that 12 additional Shadow Fleet vessels were struck between the 1st and 8th of August in the Black and Azov Seas, bringing the total number of ships targeted under Operation MoLoChKa to 218 since July 6th. That's not a campaign, that's a siege. Operation MoLoChKa is an ongoing Ukrainian military campaign launched on July 6, 2026, using naval and aerial attack drones against tankers and other vessels of the Russian Shadow Fleet in the Sea of Azov, later extending into the Black Sea. The operation's name stands for the first letters of the Ukrainian phrase meaning Moscow will fall through Crimea. That name was chosen deliberately, and as August arrives, it's starting to look less like a slogan and more like a working theory. Russia relies on a so-called Shadow Fleet, consisting largely of aging tankers sailing under flags of convenience, to export oil in circumvention of international sanctions, embargoes, and the Group of Seven-led price cap. The fleet enables the Kremlin to sustain oil revenues and continue financing its war against Ukraine. For years, Western governments could see the scheme operating in plain sight and couldn't stop it. Ukraine found a different solution. The vessels in this campaign have been hit by guided medium-range one-way drones, including the FP-1 and FP-2 drones made by Firepoint. These aren't improvised weapons. They're purpose-built ship hunters, developed in parallel with the better-known Magura V5 naval drone series that Ukraine has been fielding since 2024. The FP-1 and FP-2 fly low, they fly fast, and they're hitting ships that once considered themselves well beyond the reach of any Ukrainian strike package. The target list tells the whole story. Vessels struck include Shadow Fleet oil tankers, gas tankers, cargo ships, ferries, tugboats, and at least one liquefied natural gas tanker. Everything that moves Russian energy is now fair game. So how did this operation actually begin? And what does it look like when you track it day by day? On July 6th, Brovdi posted the first videos of drone strikes on the Sea of Azov Shadow Fleet. Tankers Captain Barman and Sonar 3 were the first vessels hit. Ukraine's drone operators struck 11 more Russian vessels in the Sea of Azov overnight on July 14th, bringing the 9-day total to 116 ships. The pace was extraordinary, roughly 13 ships every 24 hours at peak intensity. On July 15th, Brovdi said that the Sea of Azov phase had expanded to the Black Sea phase. That expansion mattered enormously. The Sea of Azov is an enclosed body of water, a natural kill box once the Kerch Strait is locked down. The Black Sea is a different theater entirely, with longer distances, different weather patterns, and far more exposure. That Ukraine's drone units could pursue the same pace of strikes after moving into open water showed that MoLoChKa wasn't operating at the edge of its capability. It was operating well within it. Of the 20 vessels struck on the night of July 14th to 15th alone, 17 were oil tankers, 2 were gas tankers, and 1 was a tugboat. That concentration on tankers was deliberate. The strikes are designed to paralyze the courier tanker fleet that moves Russian oil to export terminals and fuel to occupied Crimea. Think of the Shadow Fleet not as a single convoy, but as a supply chain with hundreds of moving parts. Knock out enough of the small feeders that shuttle crude between ports and export terminals, and the bigger vessels sitting offshore run dry. One big export tanker needs 12 to 15 small ones to fill it. Ukraine's drone pilots weren't just hunting ships, they were cutting off the supply chain that fills them. And the Kerch Strait is now closed. Brovdi declared that navigation through the Kerch Strait has been indefinitely blocked since July 10th. 30 days of frozen Russian maritime movement and counting. That's a body blow. The Kerch Strait is the only waterway connecting the Black Sea to the Sea of Azov. Close it, and you don't just stop ships from moving, you stop the entire southern logistics network that feeds occupied Crimea and keeps Russian forces supplied in the Zaporizhzhia and Kherson sectors. The disruptions caused by MoLoChKa have forced Russia to suspend navigation through the Kerch Strait and the Azov-Don Canal, freezing major ports like Rostov-on-Don and Taganrog during the critical grain harvest season. Rostov-on-Don is one of Russia's most important southern ports. Taganrog feeds military logistics to occupied eastern Ukraine. Both of them are now sitting behind a closed door that Ukraine holds the key to. This is exactly the moment to ask, is the operation actually achieving strategic damage, or is it producing dramatic video that that masks limited real-world impact. The numbers say it's real, and they come from sources far outside Kiev's own press releases. During the last 2 weeks of July, dirty tanker loadings from Russian Black Sea and Sea of Azov ports fell 62% compared to the previous 4 weeks' average. Exports averaged by just under 1 million barrels per day, compared to 2.5 million barrels per day in the prior period, according to Niels Rasmussen, chief shipping analyst at BIMCO. BIMCO is one of the world's most authoritative shipping industry bodies. A 62% drop in export loadings isn't a rounding error, it's a near collapse. Russian oil exports are critically disrupted, with an estimated 40% of export capacity halted and 135 million barrels of crude stranded at sea as of mid-July 2026. That stranded crude is sitting in hulls that can't move, can't offload, and can't earn. Every day, those barrels don't reach a buyer as revenue that never makes it into Moscow's war budget. Ukrainian analysts estimate a loss of $200 million in petroleum products per week, alongside a sharp drop in grain exports. If you've been watching this story since the summer began, and you want to understand what comes next, subscribe, because the question of whether Ukraine can hold this blockade through winter, when pressure from Moscow to reopen those corridors will reach a new peak, is exactly what we're tracking. Ukrainian military experts say strikes against enemy logistics have reduced the firepower ratio in the Zaporizhzhia and Kherson sectors from 2.5 to 1.5 to 1 in Ukraine's favor. That's a direct land war consequence flowing from a maritime campaign. Less fuel moving through Kerch means less artillery ammunition traveling south, fewer rotations of Russian armored units, slower resupply of occupied positions. The sea campaign and the front line are not separate stories. They're the same story told in different water. Brovdi has stated that Russian forces have been forced to divert resources from the front line to protect maritime logistics, with Russia reportedly reassigning up to 200 Rubicon drone teams, along with air defense assets from the 51st Air Defense Division and a Black Sea Fleet anti-aircraft regiment, to defend vessels operating in the Black and Azov Seas. 200 drone teams pulled off the front line to babysit cargo ships. That's exactly the kind of force multiplication Kiev was aiming for when it designed this campaign. The Russian countermeasures tell their own story of desperation. Russian forces are employing interceptor drones, man-portable air defense systems, and machine guns against Ukrainian maritime drone attacks. Machine guns against maritime drones? That's the gap between what Russia planned for and what it's actually facing. During one attack on tankers in July, Russian aircraft attempted to destroy the naval drones using machine gun fire and bombs, but were unable to do so. And then there's the moment from this week that nobody's quite talking about enough. Ukraine's drone forces burned a long-range Russian S-400 air defense system on the Black Sea coast and knocked out more air defenses, radars, and cargo ships in a single overnight raid, according to Unmanned Systems Forces Commander Robert Brovdi. One of the struck batteries guarded the stretch of coast in the area of Putin's reported seaside palace. That's not a battlefield target. That's a message delivered to the man who ordered the war on the shoreline, where he believes he's safe. Brovdi also published video footage showing a recent strike on a vessel near the Russian resort city of Gelendzhik, which bypassed local air defenses, including 3 missiles fired by a Panzer S-1 system. 3 missiles fired. All missed. The drone hit its target anyway. The 413th Reed Regiment and the 412th Nemesis Brigade carried out these strikes. Named units, named targets, documented outcomes. That's not propaganda. That's operational accountability at a level most conventional militaries don't achieve. Now, for the honest side of the ledger, Ukraine's claimed figures, made on the force's official Telegram channel and amplified by Brovdi, have not been independently verified. That's a legitimate caveat. Ukraine has every incentive to present the most favorable count, and the fog of maritime warfare makes independent verification genuinely difficult. What's harder to dispute is the 62% export drop that BIMCO measured from commercial shipping data and the Kerch blockade that any satellite image can confirm. There's also a real question about scope creep. Ukraine has been increasingly successful in targeting Russia's shadow fleet of oil tankers carrying sanctioned fuel, but blockading the Sea of Azov could have a wider impact, including on exports that have not been subject to sanctions like wheat or sunflower oil. About a quarter of Russia's wheat exports is shipped through the Sea of Azov. When grain stops moving, global food prices feel it, and that creates political pressure on Ukraine from partners who need stable commodity markets. It's a constraint Kyiv is aware of, and it shapes how far MoLoChKa can push before the diplomatic cost starts to bite. Yet the strategic picture doesn't change because of those complications. Oil exports are the biggest source of cash for Russia's war, and Ukraine has spent 2026 attacking that revenue, where Western sanctions left the money moving, hitting both the refineries that produce the fuel and the tankers that carry it. MoLoChKa is the tanker half of that equation. Together they form a squeeze that no sanction package ever managed to replicate, because Ukraine isn't asking a third country to comply. It's enforcing the blockade itself, in real time, with drones that cost a fraction of what they're destroying. According to analysts interviewed by Ekonomik Pravda, Ukraine is gradually laying the groundwork for a full maritime blockade of Russia's Black Sea ports. If Ukraine maintains the current pace of strikes, Russia's financial losses in 2026 could amount to tens of billions of dollars. That's the estimate from analyst Honchar, who said the figure could reach several tens of billions if the pace doesn't decline. Brovdi has been explicit. Operation MoLoChKa will continue even after the announced target of 221 vessels. The number was never the point. The blockade is the point. The attrition of Russia's ability to monetize its energy reserves quietly and continuously through a fleet that was supposed to be invisible to Western pressure is the point. Ukraine found the shadow fleet, switched on a light, and started burning it. The markers to watch from here are straightforward. First, whether Russian oil loadings from Black Sea ports recover or stay suppressed through the autumn. Second, whether Russia can assemble enough air defense coverage to protect its remaining commercial corridors without gutting its frontline capabilities further. Third, whether Ankara's call for a moratorium on attacks against merchant vessels gains any traction with Kyiv, or whether Ukraine judges the campaign's strategic value too high to pause. So here's the question worth debating. Is Operation MoLoChKa Ukraine's most effective economic weapon of the entire war, or is Russia's resilience deeper than the shipping data suggests, with enough alternative export routes to absorb the damage long term? Leave your answer in the comments, and if you want to follow how this unfolds through the months ahead, subscribe, because this blockade is only getting harder to ignore.